Hello everyone, this is Bradley. So today this is a voice recording to do a Meteor shower animation. Knowing that in the past I've done a procedural setup within animation nodes, and I posted a demonstration and noding with that. Today we're going to do this in geometry nodes. I'm going to use 3.1 and the newest presets, but you should be able to replicate this in 3.0. I just want to show you how presets are being improved in the newest version. But by functionality, there is nothing really changed. So let's start. So here we're in Blender. Let's start with an object called geometry node tree and lock the interface. So the first thing I need is essentially to get a shape. So I want to have a spline looking like this, an arc. So I think it would be better if we start with a quadratic bezier. It does not look like what I'm looking for, but if you try to tweak some values, then it becomes flatter, and this is what I'm looking for. Okay. Here I would like to take a transform because I want to rotate that a little bit. So let's take a rotation X and rotation on Z, just to get an orientation that you like. Also to know that by changing the scale, you can determine how flat it will be. This is kind of important because we can deal with something very important later when we're instancing it. Okay, we need to instance that a little bit. So I do not really care how you instance that. For example, you can potentially take a grid and let's take a point distribute. This point distribute is very similar to distributes points node. The only difference is I'm setting the amount. This one is setting the density, which means larger the mesh, more stuff you will be instancing, and you do not really know the amount that you instance. So I do not like this. So let's instance maybe 55. Something like that, and points instancing. Take the transform into instance. So now this is what we are getting. Okay. So knowing that previously I mentioned by changing the Y scale, you can make it flatter or more whatever shape. So in this case, we can potentially take a combine XYZ for this scale. Let's take that to scale. Okay, and let's add a randomness node. And by changing the Y, so here what we can do, I think let's just increase the, no. I think on Z, yes, on Z axis. So some of them is very tall, some of them is very flat. Just to play around with this kind of value, and you get some randomness. Okay, so this is just the first scale. You can play around with it by yourself. I would like to deal with rotation as well because now they're straight. So for rotation, I'm still going to combine XYZ. And I'm going to rotate on Z axis first. So in this case, instead of using the randomness, I'm going to use the random value. So randomness is actually built based on this random value. There are several reasons for me to build a specific preset. For example, I can control the average and then variance so that I can use a single value to control all this kind of randomness instead of tweak a maximum, minimum, maximum, minimum, minimum, maximum. Okay, but in this case, the reason I'm using random value instead of randomness node is because I want to have a positive and a negative value. So here, let's just take a negative. So that the minimum will be the negative values, origin will be the maximum value. So that by using a single value, I get positive and negative results at the same time. Okay, so this is the reason. Okay. I think this is okay. So next, we're going to, what should I do? Next is basically, there are multiple things you can do. For example, now everything's like on a plane, very flat. So you can also take a set position. And in the offset, let's combine X, Y, Z. I think I'm going to use the random value node. I do not have a definitive answer because this is completely your personal preference. Just to add some value. Another thing that you can do is add some rotations on X and Y as well. So always changing the seeds, getting new negatives, and on X, and basically we do the same on Y, changing the seeds. So finally looking like this. You can add a lot more details, but I'm not going to continue with this. I'm going directly bevel the curve so that I can have some thickness. Let's decrease the radius a little bit. So this is a path, very ugly, not anywhere interesting. So we're going to trim it so that you have a basic animation. Okay. So if you trim the end, then it shows up. If you trim the starts, it'll disappear. Okay. So the difference between start and end will be the length of our spline. This is very important. Okay. Here I'm going to use a preset which is called a motion variance. And I'm going to subtract with a number. And this number will essentially determine the interval or the length of this entire setup. And this is how it looks right now. So let's decrease this interval a little bit. And this is how this animation essentially looks like right now. So we can choose an angle to place our cameras, something like that. This is good. Okay. But this animation currently is kind of very boring, as we will see, because there is no randomness. Everything is going on the same. So we are going to create some randomness, or actually the delay, so that all these kind of splines are not being trimmed at the same time. What we're going to do is basically a delay fold. Delay fold is basically to offset each of them based on the index. Okay, so the first one will complete the animation earlier than the second one, earlier than the third one, earlier than the fourth one, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is driven by the index. In this case, the index should be applied to each instance. So we take an attribute instance so that we have an index for every attribute. Actually, in this case, I'm not going to use this node. I'm directly going to plug this instance into the random index, so that will randomize the index inside this node group. Okay. And then we are going to use the for to trigger the parameter. And by manipulating this time, we should be able to see the difference if you increase the step interval a little bit more. Actually, right now we do not see anything. There is a reason for that. The reason is that all these kind of curves are instances. So they are copying the data together. So you need to do the randomized instance. So now if you play this animation, you can see some of them finished the animation much earlier than the other one. Okay. So now let's decrease the step interval and restart the entire animation. So this is how it looks. We do find a lot of issue currently. There are several reasons. For example, the fourth goes from 0 to 1. But because we are adding the variance on the start and the speed, so they do not start at the same time, they do not disappear at the same time. In this case, what you can actually do is to just increase the maximum and the minimum a little bit more, so that when you try to play this animation, you can see this delay while they will completely disappear at the start and the end. This is more like kind of value things that you tweak, and this is it. Okay. This is actually pretty simple. The rest are all just about randomness and all these kind of settings. For example, maybe I would like to increase the size X a little bit more. Yeah, this is really about it. So what if I would like to have a randomness on the interval, because it feels like everyone is of the same length. Actually, they must not be at the same length, because we actually scale the instance differently. But actually, we didn't. But actually, it does not really matter. So what you can do is just to keep adding randomness, or keep adding random value. Let's make it at 0.12. And by increase the variance, you can see some of them is extremely short, some of them are extremely long. And then you just apply this time. In 3.1, we start to have a scene time node. I still prefer use the time info node. Actually, the time info node includes this scene time node, so it's essentially the same. The reason I like time info node is because I always have a division control of the rate. Okay. But in this case, you always make the factor 1. That does not really matter. Sometimes it's kind of chaotic. It's just a personal preference. This animation will not continue after they finish themselves. So if you want to loop this entire animation, just turn on this loop factor. 1 should be good, but I prefer 2, or it does not really matter. You can play around with parameters. Let's increase the amount. You can also change the seed, change the interval. And for this motion variance, basically the whole important part is that you have a start variance and you have a speed variance. Speed variance can be kind of very interesting and important, but it's just it's up to you how you manage these settings. And you just go to camera and play this animation. You can see it looks like this. The rest are just kind of trivial, because these are all geometry generated from geometrynodes, so you need a set material. Also, if you would like to have a different thickness, then you just keep adding a new random value node. And let's name that as 0.02. It will actually tell you a bug. Okay, so let's not do this. Let's do set the curve radius. And plug the value into radius. So right now we will have a lot of issue actually, because you can see some part is very thick, some part is very thin. This is because this random value is being put on every point on the curve, while we want to have a uniform thickness. So here we need to attribute instance. for the index or ID. So this is just a way of thinking. So it just take the emission shaders, goes to render view, and have we set the material? Yes. So this is done. You just play this animation. You will see the meteor shower. You can make them definitely longer, and you can make them thinner. I think this is the, yes, now this is how it looks. So you can try to play around with this kind of values. So I hope you enjoy this video. I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.